The wolf was made of moonlight and shadow. It lay half collapsed in the mossy hollow beside her herb garden, its great chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. It was enormous, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, and it seemed to flicker at the edges as if it were not entirely real, a creature of spirit, not of flesh. But its pain was real. She could feel it like a physical ache in her own bones, a cold shard of loneliness that resonated with the hollow space inside her. Fears was a useless thing. Her father had taught her that with the back of his hand. But this was not fear. It was awe and a deep, gut-wrenching pity that pulled her forward, one slow step at a time. The creature's fur was the color of storm clouds, tipped with the silver of a winter frost. One of its paws was bent at an unnatural angle, and a low whimper escaped its throat, a sound of such profound misery it tore at her heart. She knelt beside it, her worn linen dress soaking up the dampness of the earth. She didn't think, she acted. Her hands, stained with the green of crushed herbs, reached out. She expected it to snarl, to lash out with teeth made of starlight. Instead, the massive head turned, and eyes the color of old, forgotten gold fixed on her. They held no aggression, only a weary, ancient suffering. "You're lost," she whispered, her voice barely a sound in the quiet of her clearing. The wolf blinked slowly, a sign of trust she knew from the stray animals she sometimes tended. Her fingers brushed the ethereal fur. It was cold, so cold, like touching a ghost. A tremor ran through the great beast and through her, a connection faint but undeniable, sparked in the space between them. This was how the Alpha King found them. With his spirit wolf's head resting in her lap, its shivering finally stilled by the steady warmth of her hands, its golden eyes closed in the first true peace it had known in years. The forest exploded with the sound of men and horses, but it was his silence that was the most terrifying. He stood at the edge of her garden, a giant of a man clad in black, leather, and steel, his presence a physical weight that pressed the very air down. King Niven. And his face was a mask of disbelief, rage, and a sliver of something so raw and hopeful it stole her breath. 3 weeks earlier, her world had been made of earth and leaves. Rune's life was a quiet rhythm of seasons, dictated by the needs of her garden and the ailments of the few packless villagers who dared seek her out. She was the healer in the woods, a woman living on the fringe, belonging to no one. It was a lonely existence, but it was safe. The forest was her only true companion, and it kept its secrets as well as she kept hers. She was grinding downy willow bark when the forest's peace was first shattered. The sound of heavy horses and armored men crashed through the trees, a clumsy, brutal intrusion. They were the king's guard, their black and silver livery a stark sigil of power against the green tapestry of her home. They searched with a frantic, destructive energy, trampling her carefully cultivated moon-petal blossoms without a second glance. "What are you looking for?" she had asked, her voice quiet but firm as she stood in the doorway of her small stone cottage. The captain, a man with a hard face and a sneer that seemed permanent, had looked her up and down as if she were little more than dirt. "The king's business. Not for the likes of you." She had simply held his gaze, her stillness a strange sort of challenge. She was used to being dismissed. It was the armor she had worn her entire life. After a moment, the man grunted and turned away, shouting orders to his men. They were looking for something or someone, with a desperation that bordered on panic. Whispers had trickled out from the villages for months. The Alpha King was unwell. His power was fading. His temper, once like a controlled winter storm, was now erratic and deadly. They found nothing. Of course, they left her clearing in shambles, a testament to their careless power. Rune had spent the rest of the day carefully righting crushed stems and salvaging what she could. It was as she was coaxing a bruised belladonna plant back to life that a shadow fell over her. She looked up, and the breath caught in her throat. It was him. King Niven was more myth than man, said to be centuries old, a warrior who had carved his kingdom from the frozen north with his bare hands. He was even larger than the stories claimed, broad-shouldered and immense, his dark hair streaked with silver that looked more like captured frost than age. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of molten gold, and they burned with a cold, terrifying fire. And in their depths she saw it, an exhaustion so profound it looked like a wound. He did not speak. He simply watched her, his gaze sweeping over the trampled garden, her small cottage, and finally her. She expected him to dismiss her as his captain had. Instead, his harsh expression seemed to soften, just for a second, into something unreadable. "My men were careless," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. It wasn't an apology, it was a statement of fact. "They were in a hurry," Rune replied, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. She stood, wiping her earthy hands on her apron. She would not cower, not in her own home. He took a step closer, and she had to fight the instinct to retreat. His scent filled the air, pine, cold stone, and something wild and musky that spoke of the wolf within. "We searched for something that was lost." The words were clipped, sharp. "I have seen nothing unusual," she said. It was the truth. The forest had been quiet, its creatures watchful and still, as if they, too, felt the disturbance of the king's frantic search. His golden eyes narrowed, studying her face with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. It was unnerving. He saw too much. It felt as if he could see the loneliness that clung to her like a shroud, the carefully built walls around her heart. "You live alone. You are not of the Stone River pack." "I am of no pack," she confirmed. The words tasted like ash, as they always did. Packless, unclaimed. A flicker of something, surprise, interest, crossed his face. He looked at the edge of the forest, then back at her. The clearing was unnaturally quiet, the air still and heavy. But here, in her small patch of cultivated earth, a few birds had begun to sing again. A small brown rabbit, one she often left clover for, hopped cautiously from the undergrowth. "The animals are not afraid of you," he observed, his voice softer now. "There is no reason for them to be." He was silent for a long time, the tension stretching thin between them. She felt like a mouse being observed by a hawk. She could feel the immense, coiled power within him, a barely restrained storm, and yet she also felt the deep, aching fracture beneath it. He was a man coming apart at the seams. "If you see a wolf," he said finally, his voice dropping to a near whisper, raw with a pain he could not entirely conceal, "one of shadow and starlight, you will send word." It was a command, absolute and final. "I will," she promised. He turned and was gone, melting back into the trees as silently as he had appeared, leaving her with the scent of winter and the ghost of his burning gaze. He came back 3 days later, alone. He didn't ride into the clearing, but appeared at the edge of the woods on foot, as if he had been walking for miles. He claimed he was tracking a lead, but his eyes gave him away. He was drawn to the stillness of her home. "Your garden has recovered," he noted, his gaze on the moon petals she had managed to save. "Plants are resilient," she said, not looking up from the poultice she was mixing. "They know how to heal." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. "Unlike you." He sat on a smooth, moss-covered stone near her door, setting his heavy gauntlets aside. It was a strangely domestic sight, the fearsome alpha king resting in her herb garden as if he belonged there. He asked her questions, not about his missing wolf, but about the herbs she grew, about the forest, about her. His curiosity was a strange and unsettling thing. No one ever asked about her. "Why do you live this way?" he asked, his golden eyes watching her hands as she worked, separate from the packs. "It is a hard life." "It is a quiet one," she countered. "Quiet is its own kind of reward." He grunted, a sound that might have been agreement. "I have not known quiet in a century." These visits became a fragile routine. Every few days he would appear. Sometimes he spoke, his deep voice a calming rumble in the air. Other times, he would simply sit in silence, watching her work, the terrible tension in his shoulders easing just a little. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the tightening of his jaw that meant the search was going poorly, the flicker of pain in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. She was mending a tear in her apron one afternoon when a hawk-faced man in the livery of a royal counselor rode into her clearing, his horse kicking up dirt. He dismounted with a sneer, his eyes cataloging her simple cottage with disdain before landing on the king. Your Majesty, the counselor said, his voice sharp with disapproval. Lady Lyra grows concerned. The emissaries from the south are waiting. Your presence is required. At the name Lyra, a cold mask slammed down over Niven's face. The brief peace he'd found in her garden vanished, replaced by the familiar harshness of command. I will return when I am ready, Theron. My king, your duties, Theron pressed, his gaze flicking to Rune with open contempt. Wasting time with a packless hedge witch will not restore what you have lost. Niven rose to his full height in a single fluid motion. The air crackled with his fury. You forget yourself, counselor, he growled, the sound vibrating in Rune's chest. You are addressing your king. And I was speaking with the woman who holds this land in her care. Theron paled, bowing his head stiffly. Forgive me, Majesty. Niven gave Rune a final lingering look, his eyes conveying a silent apology. Then he turned and strode away, the counselor scrambling to follow. The interruption was a stark reminder of the chasm between their worlds. He was a king, surrounded by politics and enemies. She was a woman who spoke more to plants than to people. The world kept pulling him away. Messages would arrive via stressed-looking guards. Political crises, border disputes, the endless demands of his court. And at the center of it, Rune began to realize, was the Lady Lyra. Niven never spoke her name, but Rune heard it in the whispers of the guards, in the sharp tone of the counselors. Lyra had been his chosen mate. Years ago, a powerful she-wolf from a noble line. Their parting had been bitter, a thing of legend, and now, in his moment of weakness, her influence at court was growing. She was positioning herself as the stable hand the kingdom needed. Each time Niven was forced to leave, he returned looking more worn, the lines of exhaustion carved deeper into his face. The moments they stole were oases in the desert of his responsibilities. He would arrive, shed the weight of his crown at the edge of her clearing, and for a few hours just be a man. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of bruised purple, he found her tending to a fawn with a splinted leg. He watched in silence as she crooned softly to the animal, her touch gentle and sure. How do you do that? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Make them trust you. I don't make them do anything, she replied, stroking the fawn's head. Let's listen. They know I mean them no harm. He came to stand beside her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was a stark contrast to the unnatural cold that seemed to cling to his skin. My own half, my soul, it fled from me. It will not listen. The confession was torn from him, a raw admission of his deepest failure. Perhaps it is not a matter of listening, she said softly, daring to meet his gaze. Perhaps it is a matter of healing. His golden eyes searched hers, and for a moment she saw a desperate, drowning hope. He reached out, his calloused fingers hovering just inches from her cheek. The air between them shimmered. It was a moment pregnant with unspoken things. With a longing so sharp it was a physical pain. Then, the sound of a horn echoed from the distance. A summons, the moment shattered. The king's mask was back in place. He drew back his hand, his jaw tight. I must go. He left, and the clearing felt colder, emptier than before. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that his enemies were closing in. And somehow, this quiet place and the woman who tended it had become the one thing he could not afford to lose. A week after that, the wolf appeared, not in the distance, not as a fleeting shadow, but here, in her garden, wounded, spectral, and dying. It had found its way to the only place in the kingdom where its other half had known a moment's peace. And now the king was here, his search finally over. He strode into the clearing, his eyes locked on the great wolf's head resting in her lap. The guards fanned out behind him, their swords drawn, their faces a mixture of awe and suspicion. Niven ignored them all. He came to a stop just feet from her, his chest heaving as if he had run the whole way. It is you, he breathed. The words a strange mix of accusation and reverence. He wasn't speaking to her. He was speaking to his wolf, his soul. The spectral wolf's ear twitched. It did not open its eyes, but a low rumble, almost a purr, vibrated from its chest. A sound that resonated through Rune's legs. She kept her hand steady on its head, her thumb stroking the space between its ears. He was hurt. she said, her voice calm and even though her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. He came here. Niven's gaze is finally lifted from the wolf to her. The hope she had seen before was now a raging fire in his eyes. It was terrifying and beautiful. My soul was not missing, he said, his voice thick with a dawning realization. It was waiting for you. He sank to his knees before her. A king kneeling in the dirt. He reached out a trembling hand not to the wolf, but to her. His fingers brushed against her own where they rested on the wolf's fur. The contact was electric. A jolt of energy, warm and bright, surged from her, through the wolf and into him. Niven gasped, his eyes widening. The unnatural cold that always clung to him receded, replaced by a wave of living warmth. The wolf in her lap shimmered, its form becoming more solid, more real. "What are you?" he whispered, his eyes searching hers, filled with a wonder that mirrored her own confusion. Before she could answer, a sharp, feminine voice cut through the air. "So, the great King Niven is brought to his knees by a common hedge witch." A woman emerged from behind the guards. She was tall and stunningly beautiful, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes as cold and sharp as blue ice. She wore the fine silks of the high court, and a cruel, triumphant smile played on her lips. Rune recognized the arrogance, the possessiveness. This was Lady Lyra. "She has ensnared him," Lyra declared, her voice ringing with false piety for the benefit of the guards. "A beast witch, using her dark arts to steal the king's very soul. Seize her." Niven was on his feet in an instant, a low growl tearing from his throat. He placed himself between Rune and Lyra's advancing guards. "You will touch her, and you will die," he snarled, his voice no longer human. The power that had been dormant in him surged, and his golden eyes began to glow. "You see," Lyra laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "She controls him. He would turn on his own men for her. The kingdom is in peril. Councilman Theron, you are a witness to this madness." The hawk-faced counselor stepped forward, his expression grim. "Your Majesty, the council has convened. In light of your affliction and this new complication, we have reached a decision. You must set this woman aside, banish her, and take a proper mate, one who can stabilize your power in the throne. You must choose, her or your crown." It was a coup. Wrapped in the language of concern, Rune's blood ran cold. Lyra had orchestrated this perfectly. She had used Niven's search, his desperation, and his connection to Rune to trap him. Niven looked from the counselor's hard face to Lyra's triumphant sneer, and then back to Rune, who still knelt on the ground, her hand resting on the now stirring wolf. His expression was a storm of fury and despair. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the world, and they had him cornered. He saw the calculation in their eyes. If he chose her, they would declare him bewitched and unfit to rule. Lyra would seize power, backed by the council. If he chose the crown, he would have to cast Rune away. He would have to lose her, just as he had found her. And then Rune saw the trap within the trap. They didn't just want him to banish her. They wanted him to do it so they could kill her quietly, out of his sight, removing the source of his returning strength for good. His choice was no choice at all. His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw his agony. She saw the war raging within him. He was a king. His first duty was to his people, his kingdom. He had sacrificed everything for it for centuries. How could he not sacrifice one more thing, one more person? Slowly, she shook her head. A barely perceptible movement. She gave him a small, sad smile. She understood. He took a deep breath, the sound of it ragged and broken. He turned to face the counselor, his face carved from ice. The brief warmth she had felt from him was gone, replaced by a chilling, absolute cold. "The witch has clouded my judgment," he said, his voice flat and dead. Each word was a dagger in Rune's heart. "She will be banished. Exiled beyond the northern peaks by sunrise. If she is ever seen in my lands again, she is to be killed on sight." Lyra's smile was blinding. Theron nodded, his face grimly satisfied. The guards relaxed, their swords lowering. Niven did not look at Rune again. He couldn't. He turned and strode back into the forest, his shoulders rigid, his spirit wolf dissolving into mist and shadow to follow him, leaving a profound emptiness in its wake. Two guards seized Rune's arms, hauling her to her feet. They were rough, their grips bruising. They dragged her from her home, from her garden, from the only place she had ever belonged, and shoved her toward the dark, cold path of exile. The last thing she saw was Lyra, watching from the edge of the clearing, her victory complete. The northern peaks were a desolate land of rock and ice. Exile was a slow death. The guards had left her with a small pack of supplies and a single, thin blanket, more an insult than a kindness. Here nothing grew. The wind was a constant, keening thing that sliced through her clothes and settled deep in her bones. The animals were few and wary, their hardship making them desperate and dangerous. Rune survived. It was what she did. She found a shallow cave for shelter, learned to find the tough, bitter roots that grew between the rocks, learned to read the moods of the wind. But a part of her had been hollowed out. The brief, warm connection she had felt to the king and his wolf was a phantom limb, an ache that never faded. She missed the feel of the spectral fur beneath her fingers, the rumble of Niven's voice, the burning gold of his eyes. News traveled slowly to this forgotten edge of the world, carried by grim-faced traders who braved the treacherous passes. The news was not good. King Niven's health was failing rapidly. Without his wolf, and without her, his power was guttering like a candle in the wind. Lady Lyra's influence grew daily. She ruled as regent in all but name, her decrees harsh and unforgiving. The kingdom was frightened. The stability Niven had maintained for centuries was crumbling. One evening, a half-starved trapper shared his fire with her, his face etched with worry. He was from a small village called Greywood, nestled in the foothills just south of the peaks. A village of the packless, of outcasts, a village she had traded herbs with for years. Lady Lyra has declared our kind a blight, the man rasped, his voice thin. She calls us rootless elements, a source of instability. Her soldiers are coming, they mean to purge Greywood. An example, she calls it. Ice flooded Rune's veins. The women, the children, the old men she had treated for coughs and fevers. Kind people who had been cast out by their packs, who had built a life together from nothing. Lyra wasn't making an example. She was erasing a part of the world that reminded her of Rune. It was a personal, vicious cruelty. Niven would be too weak to stop it. The council would support it. No one was coming to save them. Rune looked at her hands, chapped and raw from the cold. They were a healer's hands. But healing was not what was needed now. What was needed was defiance. She had spent her life being quiet, being invisible. Bending so she would not break, no more. She stood, her thin frame silhouetted against the dying fire. When did they come? At the next full moon. The trapper said, his eyes wide. 3 days from now, then I must be there first. She walked back into the kingdom that had cast her out. It was a death sentence, but it was a choice. Her fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was outweighed by a white-hot rage. She would not let those people die. Greywood was silent and terrified when she arrived. The villagers were huddled in their homes, the streets empty. They stared at her as if she were a ghost. She went to the village elder, a woman named Elspeth, whose grandson she had once saved from a snake bite. "You should not be here, child," Elspeth whispered, her face a mask of fear. "They will kill you. They will kill all of us if we do nothing." Rune said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "We will not be a lesson. We will not be an example. We are a people. And we will stand." They had no army, no weapons to speak of. But they had the forest, and the forest had her. On the day of the full moon, Lyra arrived with 50 of her personal guard, all clad in gleaming steel. She rode a pure white mare, her golden hair braided with silver wire. She looked like a goddess of vengeance. She saw Rune standing alone in the center of the village square and laughed. "The little hedge witch returns to die with her strays," Lyra called out, her voice dripping with contempt. "How noble! Kill her. Then burn the village." The soldiers advanced, a wall of shields and spears. Rune stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. She closed her eyes. She didn't think about the king. She didn't think about herself. She thought of the fawn with the broken leg. She thought of the rabbit in her garden. She thought of the great, sad spirit wolf. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her heart. With the silent humming power she had always kept hidden, she sent out a call, a desperate plea to the wild things of the forest. Help us. For a moment, nothing happened. Lyra's laughter grew louder. The soldiers raised their spears. Then, from the deep woods came an answer. It started as a low growl, then another and another. A pair of yellow eyes blinked open in the shadows, then a dozen, 100. The Stone River Pack, the very wolves who had always shunned this village, emerged from the trees, their lips curled back from their teeth. From the other side of the forest, a massive black bear rose on its hind legs with a deafening roar. Hawks circled overhead, their screeches sharp and angry. The earth itself seemed to tremble as the forest came alive. The soldiers faltered, their confident advance slowing to a confused halt. Lyra's smile vanished, replaced by disbelief. "What is this sorcery?" she shrieked. It wasn't sorcery, it was communion. The animals were not attacking. They were simply standing with her, bearing witness, a silent, furred and feathered army. "Leave this place," Rune said, her voice amplified by the sudden, ringing silence. It carried a power she had never felt before, a resonance that vibrated in the air. "You are not welcome here," Lyra's face contorted with rage. She drew her own sword, its blade wickedly sharp. "I will kill you myself." She spurred her horse forward, charging directly at Rune. Rune didn't move, she held her ground. Just as Lyra raised her sword to strike, a flash of moonlight and shadow materialized from thin air beside Rune, the spirit wolf. It was no longer weak or flickering, it was immense, solid, its fur bristling with power, its golden eyes blazing with protective fury. It met Lyra's charge with a snarl that shook the heavens, and her horse reared in terror, throwing her to the ground. The wolf stood over Rune, a silent, deadly guardian, and through it Rune felt him, Niven. His strength, his will, his presence, surging through the bond she hadn't known they still shared. He was here. Niven arrived on foot, walking out of the forest like a king returning from war. He was thinner, his face gaunt, but the cold weakness was gone. His eyes glowed with golden light, fixed on Rune and the wolf at her side. He ignored Lyra scrambling in the dirt. He ignored the stunned soldiers. He only had eyes for her. He stopped before her, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her worn clothes, her determined stance, the incredible power that now radiated from her. His spirit wolf nudged her hand, a soft, ethereal touch, before turning to stand by its master's side. They were whole again. "I was wrong," Niven said, his voice raw, broken, and full of awe. "To send you away. It was the choice of a king, but not the choice of a man. I almost lost everything." "You found your way back," she whispered, her throat tight with tears she refused to shed. "You called me back," he corrected softly. He looked at the assembled animals, the silent army at her command. "He is not broken," he murmured, looking at his wolf. Then his eyes met hers again, blazing with a truth that shattered all her defenses. "He is mine, and so are you." He stepped forward and gathered her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt a tremor run through his massive frame. It was the shudder of a man who had stared into the abyss and been pulled back from the edge. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in the world. They just stood there for a moment, breathing each other in, while two armies, one of men, one of beasts, watched in stunned silence. Finally he drew back, his hands framing her face. His thumbs brushed away the grime from her cheeks. "I love you," he said, the words simple, absolute, and earned through fire and ice and separation, "and I will never let you go again." He kissed her then. It was not a king claiming his prize. It was a man finding his soul. It was warmth and life and the sudden, explosive completion of a bond that had been forged in quiet moments and tested in brutal crisis. A wave of pure energy surged between them, a light that erupted from their joined lips. The animals of the forest let out a collective cry, a howl, a roar, a screech of acknowledgement. The land itself recognized its queen. Lyra was taken into custody, her treachery exposed for all to see, her soldiers leaderless and faced with an army of wolves and the full, restored power of their alpha king, threw down their weapons without a fight. 6 months later, Rune stood on the balcony of the great castle, Niven's arm wrapped securely around her waist. The chill of the stone was a distant memory, replaced by the constant, steady warmth of his presence. She was no longer the packless healer. She was Rune, the queen, the voice of the wilds, her counsel valued as much as his command. Greywood was now a protected territory, its people no longer outcasts but the first citizens under her personal care. The packs, once so rigid in their laws, were learning a way that valued inner strength over bloodlines. The kingdom was not just stable, it was more alive than it had been in centuries. Niven pressed a kiss to her temple, his touch still sending a jolt of warmth through her. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I was thinking about my garden," she confessed with a small smile, "about how some things, once broken, can grow back stronger than before." He turned her to face him, his golden eyes soft and full of a love that still sometimes stole her breath. "My soul knew where to find its cure long before my mind did," he said. "It knew to go to you." Down in the courtyard, his spirit wolf, now a constant shimmering presence at their side, looked up and let out a soft, contented sigh. It curled up in a patch of sunlight. Finally at peace, finally home. Niven and Rune watched it for a moment, their hands intertwined. A king and a healer who had found their kingdom not in a castle or on a throne, but in the quiet, unshakable strength of each other. The world was vast and full of challenges yet to come, but they would face it together, their bond the unshakable heart of a new and better world.